Welcome, dear followers of the Horn of Africa TV. Today program, we have a guest from all the way from Washington, D.C. to discuss about his new book. The book is titled The History of the USA in Eritrea, from Franklin D. Roosevelt to Barack Obama, and how Donald Trump changed the course of history. Our guest tonight is Mr. Amanuel Biedemariam. Please welcome Mr. Amanuel. Mr. Amanuel, how are you?
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mohamed Badawy. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, sir. I have a great respect for book writers and for writers in general. Many Eritreans follow you, on the social media. I'm one of your fans. So it gives me a real great pleasure to interview you today about your new book.
Thank you for having me here. I also follow Horn of Africa TV. All the years you have posted a lot of my articles on your website for a long time, and I do appreciate that as well.
You're most welcome, sir. In the beginning, I just want to bring your attention or our viewers' attention. Today is the eve of the beginning of the Eritrean armed struggle for independence, which is the 1st of September 1961, by the hero Hamid Idris Awate and his comrades. The next 30 years, as you will see how our guest put it on his book, the Eritrean people fought as one person and as one family and won the war. Glory to our martyrs. Mr. Amanuel, if you can allow me just to quote a passage from your the book review. You said one cannot tell the story of Eritreans without revealing the story, revealing the U.S. involvement in Eritrea, which is the core, the driver of all activities after 1941. The good thing is history is well documented. The transcripts, pictures, and related evidences are mostly sourced from the U.S. government historic archives. The telegram exchange, telephone conversations, and summaries of meetings provide a unique insight into the mindset of the actors. It is unfiltered history for all readers who want to understand the true nature of the U.S. involvement in Eritrea, unquote. This passage makes my day. I mean, there is a lot of information there, and I think we are expecting to have the greatest book of all. Having said that, let me go to my first question. This book is volume number 1 of 4-part series that will be published soon. Is this your first book, Amanuel? And why is this book? And the challenges, opportunities, methodology, and process you followed, and what's going to be its contribution to the U.S., Eritrea, and the world at large?
Well, thank you. Yes, this is my first book. It is a very, very long, tedious process to write a book, but I have been writing for a long time about the very subject, about the U.S. involvement in various, phases, different subjects, but it was not really comprehensive. It was not all tied together. It didn't come all together. So it needed to come together. The articles that we have been writing over the years kind of give you snapshots of what was happening. Like, for instance, when we talk about the sanctions, how the sanctions came about, and you're looking at some background, but when you want to write a book, you want to go back from the beginning. And when I started writing the book was about Eritrean communities abroad. And it goes back to 1940s, 1950s, after the, after World War II. And so when you look back at the history, how Eritreans started to leave the country, it was based on the war, after World War II, which is 1942, when the United States came, when the British administration were there, when the Italians were defeated. that was the time when the changes of people were coming about. So it starts from there, and then it just develops, and everything kind of comes together and comes all the way up until 2018. And a lot of people have been leaving as a result, you know, of all the wars, of all the pressures that have been applied by Western countries. And, you know, that's very important. So when I started writing the book about the people of Eritrea, their exodus, and what they do in the outside, their contribution to Eritrea, you know, I don't like to call the Eritrean communities abroad diaspora, because most of them have connections with their country, and they have ID cards. They are members of the Eritrean society in Eritrea. They don't really leave Eritrea behind. They're not out there and they just don't go away like they go back to their country. They're very connected. They are part of the country, integral part of the country. We have played a key role in the independence and everything. So when you talk about the history of Eritrea, you have to understand the source of what that exodus is, and it all comes down to that era. And the United States had played an excellent role. I mean, not excellent in a way that is good, but it prominent role that really affected the people from the early going. So that's the reason why the history of the United States had to be explored. And the deeper you go, the more you know, the more there is to tell about the United States. Because in 1942, when World War II was going on, the first victory of the war was won from Eritrea. They established in Eritrea. What happened in 1942, Franklin Roosevelt was called by Winston Churchill for an assistance to come and assist him during the war, because the British, the French, and all the European countries were really having difficulties to deal with Germany. With all the attacks in Germany, they were in a very bad position, so they called in the United States. And the United States came and wanted to establish themselves, and they did establish immediately in Gura, which is very close to Asmara, about 40 kilometers from Asmara. And they established a base there. From there, they were, they were fixing the vessels in Massawa. They were fixing the helicopters, and all the fighter jets that they were using from Eritrea. And they ended up winning the war on the African part, the North Africa part of the war in World War II. That's one of their first victories. And so those are the kinds of things that have not been explained or exposed before. And it is very, very important to go back, start, and then from there, the beginning of the United States and Eritrea starts. That's how the whole process started. And there are a lot of things to uncover about it, and Eritreans have not really got deep into understanding and studying the role of the United States in Eritrea deeply. And I think this book attempts to do that.
When we come to the U.S. itself, regarding Eritrea, in 1941, during the Roosevelt administration, what was the link between Ethiopia and Eritrea regarding the link between Ethiopia and the United States regarding Eritrea?
Well, in 1942, Haile Selassie just returned from exile, and he didn't have a whole lot to say about what was happening in the country. The British had control of Ethiopia. Basically, they were in the palace. They allowed him to come in. So Haile Selassie, Ethiopia, were not in a position to dictate anything at that point, because first of all, they didn't have any arms. They were just colonized by the Italians for about 5 years. The Italians were there for about 5 years. This is right at, during the war and after the war. So they didn't have the control of Eritrea. They didn't have control of anything. At that point, the the first priorities for Ethiopia were to get the British out of Ethiopia to self-administer, and the second phase was, later on they wanted to establish themselves. They want to have access to the ports. That was one of their demands, and the United States was willing to accommodate that because it had its own interest. And the interest of the United States at that point was, first of all, the United States did not have presence in Africa in that period. They did not have a presence in Africa, and also Eritrea is an extremely strategic location for them because it's on the Red Sea. It's one of the most strategic places on earth. They had a very, very unique strategic approach in that area, which is there are three choke points, water choke points, which is the Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Bab el-Mandeb, which are very close to Eritrea. From the Suez Canal in Israel and Egypt, which are U.S. allies, then and also from the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf. Russia was, Iran was an ally of the United States during Shah, and having Eritrea as part of that triangulation was key to U.S. interest, to be able to control vast area, oil-rich area from three choke points that are very, very critical. So having a presence in Eritrea served three purposes for the United States. Number one is to make sure that they have a presence to be able to be a part of that triangulation. The second part of it is that Eritrea is very high in terms of elevation, and they wanted to establish a base in there. That base was, very, very key to monitor, Russia, a lot of other countries, activity, communication, all kinds of espionage, and all kinds of intelligence operations were conducted from Eritrea, and they wanted to have a base. And the third part of it is, using Ethiopia, they wanted to establish a presence in Africa. This was the first time that the United States coming in Africa. A lot of the colonial powers at that time, France and England, and a lot of the Europeans, were in bad shape because of the war, Second World War, which the Germans battered, and they rendered them in a very weak position. And so the United States wanted to come in to establish itself for the first time in Africa, and Ethiopia gave them an excellent opportunity. So there is a lot more to U.S. interest in Ethiopia that incorporated many, many strategic interests, and it worked out really for them. So the Ethiopian interest, even though it's not driven by the United States dictated how everything came about. So that's basically Ethiopia's role, and they did not have as much say a role. They wanted access, that's all they wanted.
The common understanding, Manuel, is the UN always facilitate all the policies of the United States, when they go and do, any, whether it's invasion or settlement, always the UN is plays a big role. For example, the longest serving First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, which is in your book, I'm just quoting, was the first woman has served as the US ambassador to UN. Yet little is known of the impact and important role the UN played in Africa and various parts of the world during her tenure or when she was posted at the UN. The people who worked under her supervision were responsible for what happened also in Eritrea. And these people, as you mentioned, played in Africa, various parts of the world, You know, they brought a lot of change. What was her mission and arguments about Africa in general and about Eritrea at the same time?
Well,
Of Eleanor Roosevelt, she was the UN member.
the Eleanor Roosevelt was the UN Human Rights delegate during a critical moment in their history. She was present. In other words, the United States was very, very interested to use the United Nations to do a lot of the things that they want to do. So everything that they tried to do in Eritrea, you know, the federation, the Constitution, was all written by the United States. It had absolutely nothing to do with the United Nations. It's the United States delegates, representatives that wrote the federation process. They are the ones that came up with the federation process. They are the ones that wrote the federation process. The book outlines that completely. All the documents are there, details exactly who the players were, and in detail, and how the Constitution of Eritrea came about. They detail. It was all part of the process that the United States wanted to impose in a way, and that's what they did. And what the United States wanted is what won. Initially, the British wanted to divide Eritrea into two, and they wanted to do the northern part, which is the Kebesa part of Eritrea, to Ethiopia, and the lowlands, the highlands and the lowlands to be a part of Sudan. At that time, the British controlled Sudan, and so they wanted to do that, still have presence in Eritrea, and they want to take part. They want to take part of the lowlands of Eritrea because it's lush agricultural area, and they wanted to incorporate it as part of Sudan. And they also, like I said, the highlands and to Ethiopia, incorporated into Ethiopia and give access to the sea to Ethiopia. But that was rejected by the United Nations. And, you know, so the United States approach to Federation won, and that's how the federation process started. At that time, Ethiopia didn't have a lot to say except to ask for arms, you know, just to establish themselves, assistance from the United States, because they were just coming out of the war. They didn't have money, and the country was all sparse, and they wanted to establish Haile Selassie as a prominent member of the world community. And so they did a lot to utilize Ethiopia in a manner that, you know, served their interests. And so the propping up Haile Selassie was a very, very important part of what they tried to achieve. And they did that.
Yeah, moving to 1953, Amanuel, the US signed a security agreement with Ethiopia after US and Ethiopia secured a federation agreement that followed, that allowed them both to establish a presence in Eritrea. Now, the next line is underlined. We need to stress on the next question. The US used UN masterfully to control Eritrea via Ethiopia. The US used UN masterfully to control Eritrea via Ethiopia. So the question is, if you can explain this, the signed security agreement that allowed the US to control Eritrea via Ethiopia, who had the upper hand over Eritrea according to this document? I mean, when it says the US used the UN masterfully to control Eritrea via Ethiopia, it sounds like Eritrea was a sovereign US land, but looked after or, you know, controlled by Ethiopia.
Well, the reality is Ethiopia did not have any control in Eritrea until they signed the Federation Agreement and came in. That was the first time that they came in. Ethiopia did not have any presence in Eritrea until 1952. the United States wanted to have a presence in Eritrea, but they have to go through the United Nations process in order to be able to get in, because if they just came in and took over Eritrea, which they could have done, and they would have been considered colonizers. And after World War II, a lot of the European countries were losing their colonies, and African countries were becoming independent. Eritrea was colonized by Italy, and if they came over, took over Italy's territories, that means that the United States becomes a colonizer. And one of the very important studies that the CIA did at that time, which is presented in the book, they wanted to establish themselves in Africa. They also wanted to keep the European nations and the African countries that they colonized in the past, because first of all, the United Nations, the United States did not want the Soviet Union to come over and take over a lot of the different countries. So they wanted the influence of the European colonies, the former colonies, to be in Africa. The United States thought that it was very important for the former colonial powers to be in Africa, because they thought that they were going to be able to help the African countries economically, and also in terms of security. And they also did not trust the African countries with all their resources to be able to manage them themselves. And they were concerned that giving African countries that much power is going to be negative for the U.S. interests, especially when it comes to resources and strategic presence, especially in times of war. So they have conducted a study and determined that it's very important for the European colonies, the former colonizers, to have presence, but give a semblance of freedom to the African nations. And so in order to have presence in Eritrea, the United States wanted to bring Ethiopia into the play. The British idea, breaking Eritrea down to two, did not work for their interest, so they decided to go with the federation process. And so they have to go back and forth to make arrangements with Ethiopia to bring Ethiopia into Eritrea. But one of the conditions for Ethiopia to come in was to be able to sign agreement. So they signed a federation agreement for 10 years to go through the federation process, but United States cannot come in Eritrea and take over Eritrea. But if Ethiopia becomes the custodian of Eritrea, then the United States can sign an agreement with Ethiopia, who was at that time the legal custodian of Eritrea. And once Ethiopia becomes a legal custodian of Eritrea, and then they can come sign security agreement. They can do the base arrangement, which they got in 1952. Ethiopia signed the Federation Act, and then 5 or 6 months later, in May of 1953, the United States signed the security pact that we were talking about. And from then, they came in, they took a base in Biedemariam, which is Kanyo Station. They took a base in Kanyo Station. They were in Karen and they were in Massawa. And so that's how they established themselves. They used the United Nations. They used Ethiopia to establish a presence in Eritrea. So that's the masterful part. But there was a lot more that went on, to get Ethiopia into Eritrea. It was a very interesting process, and the book outlines that hopefully well.
So I'd just like to emphasize on this question again, just to have a concrete answer. Amanuel, was Ethiopia pushed to do the dirty job of the United States, and it was not initiated by Haile Selassie to come and enter Eritrea?
I wouldn't characterize it that way. Ethiopia had its own interest. They wanted to, actually they wanted more. Once they knew that the United States wanted to come into Eritrea, Ethiopia, of course, wanted access to the sea. And at that time, as part of the negotiation, the Ethiopians wanted to take parts of Somalia, and at that time they wanted arms and all kinds of aid, the military aid especially. The Somalia idea was taken off. The United States did not want to give that, and the arms part, they managed to give them arms after Ethiopia ended up going to the Korean War, took part in the Korean War, sent about some soldiers and gave some money, during the war. That kind of solidified Ethiopia's position in the United Nations, in Africa, the leader in Africa, because for the first time an African country was able to send troops, peacekeeping troops. So, and it was good for the United States to sell to the world and to the US Congress. Ethiopia is a good partner. They could work in missions with us, and the North Korean War was a part of that. And it's a very, very important part of the whole process. And so they sent the Kanyo battalions, which are Ethiopia's main, the Kubra Zavenya, they were the guards, for
Royal Guards.
Royal Guards for Haile Selassie. Thank you. And so, and because of that, the United States gave them arms. They gave them all the support they needed, and they got the base, and they named it after Kanyo Station, which is the battalion that went and fought in North Korea.
Yes. Well, we'll come to the Kanyo Station. I'll go back again to the Eritrean Federation with Ethiopia and its annexation. Let me quote from the passage of the overview of the book. The Eritrean experience is unparalleled because no one wanted Eritrea to succeed. There was no support from any nation or global organization. After all, it was the United Nations that determined the fate of Eritrea, with federations that united it with Ethiopia in 1952 and the unchallenged illegal annexation in 1962. So the question here is, what was the United States' reaction to the annexation, and what happened to the security agreement between both the United States and Ethiopia, which was signed in 1953?
Well, the federation was kind of a way to ensure the United States that a smooth transition has taken place between, Ethiopia and Eritrea. They did not want to see violence. They don't want the United Nations to be alarmed, and they also did not want to see the Eritrean question of the United Nations come up as much as possible. So they wanted to give a semblance that there was a legal process that took place. And when you think about it, when all African countries were handed their independence, at that time, Eritrea deserved that. And so they wanted to make sure that, the British wanted to make sure that Eritrea is not considered viable as a nation. And so when they came in, they basically looted the country. They destroyed the economy. They, did away with a lot of the labor unions. A lot of they did a lot of damage to the country economically. And in order to show that Eritrea is not viable as a country. So in 1952, when the United States came in, they basically wanted access into Eritrea legally, without any questions from the United Nations, from the world community. And the British were in line, the French and everybody else was in line with what the United States was doing. The United States was a dominant force. They were the winners of the war, World War II. They controlled over everything that the world was going. And the Italians did not have a say. They were defeated. They were defeated badly. And they didn't have a seat at the table. Whatever they said, they listened to them, but the United States idea was going to win. And so the the federation process was basically a way to ease the United States into Eritrea. But once in Eritrea, they knew all along that it's going to be annexation. They are going to do the annexation. So they didn't have any problem with what Ethiopia did in 1962 when they annexed Eritrea. So that's how it was kind of like, understood that that's what they wanted, but this is the process that they have to go through. But once Ethiopia got into Eritrea legally in 1952, they ended up, just basically taking control of the country. They brought in their military. They controlled, the key important points. At that time, the Eritreans were not in a position to defend themselves, and there was nobody that could say anything for Eritrea on behalf of Eritrea. The people of Eritrea at that time did not have access to the world community. The representation they had was very minimal. Those who wanted independence spoke out, but very few of them were able to get access to the United Nations. Mr. Ibrahim Sultan, Talabairu, those people were, cast in a negative light, and they ended up leaving the country under pressure. And so a lot of the student movements were suppressed. There was a lot of things that Haile Selassie did in order to suppress and to establish presence in Eritrea, and the United States knew it, and they just allowed it to happen. And in 1962, when Ethiopia annexed Eritrea, the world community did not say anything, and that's the reason why the fight for independence started. And
Eritrean armed struggle started. Yes, I think the main reason United States came to Africa is it was during the Cold War, and they needed a presence in Africa. So they established Kanyo Station, whether Eritrea was annexed by Ethiopia or before the annexation, they had the presence. And as it's put in the book, Kanyo Station, which is the base, the American base in Eritrea, broadcasted TV programs and ran popular radio stations. They shared the American perspective, history, culture, music, sports, and movies. They even shared the moon rock of the Apollo 11, which was displayed in the city for thousands of students who lined up to see it on the expo ground. They celebrated the 4th of July in grand style and so on. They did, it was a mini USA probably back in Eritrea. The question is, did the Eritrean people really benefited from economically from this space, from the presence of the Americans?
Well, the Americans were there for strategic reasons. They knew the sensitivities that that Eritrea was basically taken advantage of. They knew at some point that Eritreans are going to come back and demand their rights. And in the book, and a lot of their exchanges, they talk about those issues. They talk about right now this is what's happening, but especially the Muslims, they're going to come back and to demand what's theirs. They knew that, and so they understood the security concerns that Eritrea can pose to them. So they were very mindful and limited to the areas that they wanted to live in. They lived in they had a place in Karen. They had a place in Massawa on the Red Sea. They also had a prominent presence in Asmara and Kanyo Station. So they were confined in the Kanyo Station. Most of them lived within the confinement of Kanyo Station, but there are people that lived outside Kanyo Station. They became a part of the community. Not a whole lot of them, but they became a part of the community. I actually got, while I researched the book, I ended up, meeting a lot of the Kanyo people through social media and interacted with them, and they have very fond memories of Eritrea. And they were a part of the community because they employed Eritreans there. There were mothers there that worked in the station with the families. They took care of them. there were Eritreans who worked in the Kanyo station and the restaurants. And it was just a city within a city. And so there's a lot to do there. So yeah, of course, they had a part in the lives of Eritreans. That they played their music, they showed their television stations, they broadcasted live everything that was happening in the United States and Eritrea. They showed movies. A lot of people didn't have TV at that time in Eritrea, but they huddle in places where there are TVs to watch Bonanza, Little House in the Prairies, and things like that. And so it was a very, very interesting moment. And so they provided some economic assistance in a way that, because there are some families who work there, but their main objectives were intelligence. They had satellite dishes from where they monitored the Soviet Union, a lot of other countries around the world. And it was really, really everybody, all the intelligence apparatus of the United States were present in Eritrea. Eritrea was a very, very significant place for them. And Eritrea was just a very interesting history for the United States. It's an untold story because what happened in Eritrea at that point between 1942 and 1960 kind of determined how the colonial powers in Africa became who they were after the World War II. And the Cold War was essentially started in Eritrea because the United States took strategic advantage, and so Eritrea was a very, very important part of them. And when they were present, after 1962, the Eritrean Revolution started. 1961. After that, they called them shiftas, meaning bandits, but they really posed a great deal of concern for the United States in different places. And so because of that, they were mindful and just kind of relegated to Kanyo Station and to the places that, and whatever they did cautiously at that point, based on the research.
Well, 1974 to 77, it was a time for the USA to be pushed out of Eritrea by the new communist military regime in Ethiopia. Was there any attempt by the Americans to save their ally, the monarch, and his government from collapsing, and just save the base, Kanyo Station in Eritrea?
Well, Ethiopia was kind of a tinderbox from the beginning. There was a revolution to oust Haile Selassie early 1960s, and it was stopped. The United States, it was stopped. They managed to stop it. Haile Selassie brutally managed to stop it. And at that point, one of the studies, one of the reports, the documents that I unearthed in the book, what they're saying is, as long as Haile Selassie is in power and he's able to do whatever he needed to do brutally, the country is going to be good. And at that point, in 1962, Ethiopia became a very important, viable nation, and received a lot of assistance from the United States in terms of arms, and they had about 45,000 soldiers, modern equipment established on the Red Sea. So Ethiopia fast became, all the Ethiopian soldiers were trained by Israeli and U.S. forces. And so it quickly became a powerhouse in the region. So they believed that as long as Ethiopia is powerful, nothing is going to happen. But over time, what happened is Haile Selassie started getting old, and the feudal system that he established, he started losing grip. And when the military government took power in 1974, they were, something that they did not expect, which is the influence of the Soviet Union came into Ethiopia. At that time, they didn't have any choice but to basically evacuate. And just a couple of years later, they were just forced out, and they were not even able to gather all their documents and the way they want to. They did a very rushed thing, and they kind of escaped in a way like they did in Saigon from Eritrea. So in the book, I kind of talk about it. They just gathered everybody that was there, 1977, and left. They couldn't even stop. And Addis Ababa, they ended up going directly to Kenya because the Ethiopian government did not allow them. So things were not very good at that point. So what is significant about that is that what the United States did not want to see happen. They did not want to see the Soviet influence in Eritrea and Ethiopia, and that came to fruition. And it's very significant because the Soviet Union came. The Soviet Union had the same idea. They wanted to use Ethiopia the same way the United States wanted to use Ethiopia. So that's the reason why the wars between 1974 until independence, 1991, especially up until 1988, 89, the war against Eritrea by the Soviet-supported Ethiopian government. And so they were really forced. The United States was forced out in 1974. So from 1974 until independence in 1991, the United States had absolutely no role in they wanted to come back in. They wanted, even when Derg was president, they wanted to have presence in some ways. And so they were trying to do a lot of different things to come back in. But, Mengistu Haile was not that kind of a person.
Yeah. The people of Eritrea fought the most powerful nation of the world for 3 years from 1961 to 1991 and won. They fought as one person. This is what you have said in the book. They fought as a family and won. That's the story has not been told fully because of all the destruction. Eritrea has been a part of Ethiopia, covered many grounds for the US interest. If it were up to the US, Eritrea was not supposed to exist. And the question is, how did it come to exist in 1991? And how do you describe the basic facts of the 30 years Eritrean armed struggle for independence, at least for the American audience? How do you describe it?
Well, there's just so many different ways to describe it. First of all, it is a failure, strategic failure. It would have been a lot easier for the United States to accommodate Ethiopia's interests. In other words, create some kind of an agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia about the ports. And at that point, the United States could have dealt with Eritrea directly as a nation had the United States given Eritrea the right to become an independent nation. The United States would not have to get out in the manner that they did. They could have worked out some kind of an agreement with the government of Eritrea. And so they basically did not think that Eritrea was going to be able to succeed. And so, and there was nobody to come out in support of Eritrea. So the idea that Eritreans will come together, fight for independence, and win at that time was not in their mindset. They did not really fathom the way things shaped up. 30-year war struggle against a very powerful nation supported by the United States initially, and then later by the Soviet Union. They did not envision that. That was, the resilience of the people, understanding of the people, the will of the people, the determination of the people, the doggedness of the people, the sheer willingness to sacrifice and to do whatever it takes to be able to gain the country. And, it was also helped by the fact that Ethiopia was not as strong as they believed it was. Because Ethiopia is divided by so many different ethnic groups. And also there's an incredible amount of suppression by the feudal monarchy that they supported, that the United States supported. It kind of weakened the fabric. And when the Soviet Union came, when the Soviet Union-backed Ethiopian regime came, it was very interesting. In 1974-75, the Eritrean struggle kind of mushrooms. The people of Eritrea went in droves to fight, for the country. They did not, see themselves as Ethiopians, and so it was quickly the independence was, coming to fruition around 1974, 1975. But there was disagreements between the fronts, the ELF and the EPLF, the Eritrean Liberation Front and the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. There were disagreements between the two, and it ended up becoming a civil war that went on up until 1981-82. And, and then the EPLF became the prominent power. That was kind of what slowed the process down. And also at that point, the Russians were really doing all they can to make sure that Ethiopia succeeded. And so there were waves of confrontations with the Eritrean revolutionary fighters. And so it went on for a long time. And the Eritreans masterfully, outdid the Russian-supported, Soviet Union-supported Ethiopian army for a long period of time. The United States did not envision that. The world did not envision that. And one of the things is the mindset that the Eritrean, revolutionary struggle created is kind of the mindset how to embrace the people, work with the people, work with what you have, self-reliance, learn by yourself, exploit opportunities however you can, work with, by partnership with the other fronts in Ethiopia. And Eritrea became a key player in Ethiopia's, life. Basically, Ethiopian life was determined by Eritrea, by all standards, because everything, the ports were the main lifeline for Ethiopia, and the struggle was in the way of that. The lives of the people of Ethiopia, tons of money, billions and billions of dollars were spent to fight in Eritrea. Millions, a lot of people died in Eritrea, countless people died. I mean, the numbers that, of the people that, military people, personnel that died in Eritrea, Ethiopian soldiers was just unaccounted for. I think it was just amazing. And you can see it in Asmara and Eritrea, the various parts after the war. There are tanks and, just all kinds of trucks, military trucks destroyed everywhere. So it was a very, very unique moment in the history of Africa. It was a very unique moment in the history of the world for people to come in together and, just the world undermined Eritrea. The world did not think much of Eritrea. They didn't think that this was possible. So they were really getting caught by surprise. In fact, 1988, when the Soviet Union started to stumble a little bit, that's when the United States wanted to re-engage in the post-Cold War, world. And, at that point, 1988, I don't know if you recall, there was a Carter mediated process that was started in Atlanta, and it didn't work out because the Carter, the President Carter, the former President Carter at that time, wanted to take the process back to the United Nations. And, the Eritrea would not want to go back through the United Nations because initially the United Nations was used to do the federation. That's the kind of process that they wanted to initiate. Eritrea wanted to straight independence and wanted to determine our way. And just winning militarily over the Ethiopian military was not enough. Winning politically, working with the different fronts that were in Ethiopia at that point, and working with the international community to establish Eritrea as a nation was very important, aspect of what the Eritrean struggle fought. So the Eritrean struggle is very, very unique because it came out of nowhere. It was people-based. and the country, the entire Eritrean population participated in one way or the other. It was just, the support from outside, Eritreans from the outside that, they provided for the fighters, the people in the country. And so there's just a holistic approach to fighting against the government of Ethiopia that ended up winning the war at the end.
After independence, for a brief period during the beginning of the first term of President Bill Clinton, between 1993 and 1998, the US did not actively engage against Eritrea, at least for a break. In 1998, when the WWII regime, the Ethiopian regime, initiated war against Eritrea, the US re-engaged and restarted activities designed to undermine the independence of Eritrea until 2008 during the current Trump administration. So from 1998 to 2018, again, the USA was against Eritrea and challenging the independence of Eritrea until the Trump administration came to power. So my question is, Manuel, how and why did President Donald Trump change the course of history, and what are the facts? If President Trump loses his coming election, what will happen to the relationship between USA and Eritrea?
Well, I think before we go into the Trump, to answer the Bill Clinton 1998 re-involvement, I think it's very important to go back and examine that. And what that is 1991, when Eritrea became independent, they did not anticipate it. The United States did not think that Eritrea was going to become independent. They thought that the war with the Ethiopian military will end up on a stalemate. And, at some point they had to come to some kind of a political agreement. But Eritrea was very powerful. The Eritrean, struggle was really powerful. It really surprised the world, the United States. In 1991, when Eritrea got into Addis Ababa, Menelik Palace, at that time, Herman Cohen didn't have any chance. The Bush administration didn't have any choice, and they quickly gathered, Eritrea, at that time, the representative of the TPLF, Meles, and brought them together in the London conference. And, actually there's an article by Newsweek that said that, the United States kind of changed its policy on Eritrea by necessity. They were forced to do that. And they accepted Eritrean independence, not because they wanted to, but because the United States didn't have presence, because from 1974 until 1991, the United States did not have presence in Eritrea. They didn't have allies in Ethiopia, and there were no partners in Ethiopia except for TPLF. So they didn't have presence in the ground. So they had to accept what took place between Eritrea and the TPLF taking over the country. Initially, they wanted Eritrea to be a part of the transformation. They wanted to be part of the government, but the Eritrean government and the Eritrean people did not want to have anything to do with that. And so they determined that they were going to do a referendum, and the United States accepted that. So you have from 1991 when the United States accepted it, and then 2 years later, Bill Clinton comes into office in 1993. This is a young president, a very ambitious young president at that time, and he had to formulate his Africa policy at that time. So what Bill Clinton did in 1993, after the Cold War, was the beginning of U.S. Africa policy, U.S. Eritrea Ethiopia policy after 1993. So they basically, what they did was they went back to what the U.S. policies after World War II were. So they wanted to bring Eritrea back into Ethiopia's control, the way They wanted, with John Foster Dulles, and they wanted to weaken Eritrea. They wanted Ethiopia to control it. And they, the TPLF for its own agenda was willing to do that. And so that is how it came about. The Bill Clinton basically initiated the the policy initiated after World War II. And so that was the whole idea. And so in 1998, when they started the war, was to weaken Eritrea, do regime change. The TPLF had its own agenda, of course, but it was not outright. Actually, David Shin always talks about it. He said he talked to Meles Zenawi a number of times, and he said always Meles told him that Eritrea is they're going to take over Eritrea, they're going to take over Assab. And he said, I never understood why Meles Zenawi claims that he's going to have.
He was saying to him, one day we're going to be one. And he said, I don't know what he meant by that.
Yeah, that's what he said that. So that was TPLF's subtle agenda. They had a hidden agenda to do that. But the United States wanted to control Africa using they have anchor states. There are 4 anchor states that they slated to become anchor states, which are Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Algeria. And so this 4 different anchor states in different locations of Africa, they were to be governed by kind of what they call RECs, regional economic communities. And that is how they wanted to kind of make Africa an extension of the U.S. administration, using the RECs and the anchor states as the leaders of the different parts of Africa. And Ethiopia was an integral part of that. And they really wanted that. And that was the reason why the regime change agenda from 1993, actually from 1998 until 2018 persisted. And they really tried very hard to do that, but the people of Eritrea resisted, the government of Eritrea resisted all the attempts that they have conducted to render Eritrea incapable to govern itself, with the sanctions and everything else. Eritrea overcame. And so in 2018, when, in 2016, when President Trump came, basically allowed the peace process between Eritrea and Ethiopia to go on and challenge. Before that, you have Susan Rice. That was really on the way of the process. This was during the election around 2015, 2016. Ambassador Sophia Tesfamariam and I went to meet with Herman Cohen and to talk about how the United States just reestablishing relations and all that kind of stuff. And he flat out told us, Herman Cohen flat out told us, this is quote, as long as Susan Rice is in the office, it is personal to her. She's not going to allow anything to go on. So at that point, we were just hoping that the Trump administration wins. And so, we did not want a Democrat to win. And so when Trump came in, the agenda that Bill Clinton started, George Bush followed, and then Obama kind of really did everything Bill Clinton did, because Susan Rice was a part of Bill Clinton's Africa administration. And during Obama years, she had the most prominent role in the White House, in the Obama administration's White House, first as a UN ambassador, and this second as a national security advisor. She was really a very, very prominent player at that point. And so we didn't have a chance to be able to have anything, because she took it personally. She made all kinds of effort to render Eritrea incapable to govern itself, to do a regime change, and she did everything that in her power. And so when Trump came, Trump did away with the policy of the last 20 years, or since the Cold War, and he stopped that, and he started engaging with nations independently. And they also saw the dire situation, the possibility that Ethiopia could disintegrate with all the Oromo uprisings and different things. And so it was very important for the United States to establish some kind of a stability in Ethiopia. And without Eritrea, that would have been impossible. And so basically, the peace deal between Eritrea and Ethiopia kind of changed that entire situation. They were forced to change, but there are also other factors. One of them is China. China has a very prominent presence in Africa that challenged the U.S. presence, the U.S. agenda that was in place from the end of World War II. So, and that's the reason why Trump is now actively, going against China on so many different fronts.
Well, if President Trump loses this coming election and the Democratic Party wins, the election, and Susan Rice is part of that administration, are we going to go back to square one with her?
Well, it's really hard to say. It's this is really a unique moment in history. A unique moment in history for so many different reasons. For us, the Trump administration has been very good in terms of allowing us to have peace with Ethiopia. Not allowing us, but just allowing without any kind of imposition for the peace process to flourish. The second part of it is that the peace process between Eritrea and Ethiopia is very important for us. I am not really sure what to say in terms of the administration, the Democratic administration, if it comes in, what they're going to be able to do. It's going to be difficult to determine what they are going to be able to do. I don't want them to come back into Eritrea for a number of reasons, because there's a lot of uncertainty. Like he said, the Susan Rice role, the regime change agendas that they pursued, and their goals. Are they going to go back to what they did, during the Clinton administration? And this is a person that worked with the Clinton administration, Susan Rice, and then Obama administration, and she has an agenda. And she was involved in various parts of Africa in so many different ways. She was involved in Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, South Sudan, Sierra Leone. Every aspect of Africa that, during the Clinton administration, she was a part of it. And she's going to go pursue that. And I am certain that would probably be the case. Things have changed dramatically between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Things have changed to the point where they're not going to be able to do a lot in terms of really bringing in a system that's going to be able to work against Eritrea and Ethiopia. And a lot of things are established, and I think the U.S. strategic approach in Africa is changing, in large part because of China. But are they going to come back and re-engage with Iran and restart the nuclear agreement that the Trump did away with? So how is Israel going to feel about a democratic president coming back and doing the same thing that the Obama administration did that they did not like? And how is that going to play out with the Gulf states that are working with Eritrea at this point, and that did help quite a bit in so many different ways, that are working strategically with Eritrea. So there are a lot of other different things that are going on, and I think also it's very important to know. Ethiopia is very important to Eritrea. The stability of Eritrea is very important to Ethiopia, because right now Ethiopia is facing a tremendous amount of pressure because of the Nile, as you can see. So, and the United States has something to do about that. The Israelis are interested in the Nile. Egypt is interested in the Nile. And they kind of, it looks like, from Pompeo's visit to Sudan, it was very interesting as soon as he went to Sudan, and they are trying to apply pressure on Ethiopia to go by what Israel, Egypt want in the Nile, and so that's they're trying to put pressure on Ethiopia, and there's just Ethiopia has internal pressures, from WWII and a lot of the other factions, and also external pressures from countries like Israel and the United States that wanted to really basically give in. And so, when you look at Somaliland, there is Taiwan in there. Taiwan gets a lot of support from Israel. And so the Israelis have established a different kind of presence on Somaliland, and the Somalian government does not like it. So they're trying to apply pressure on Ethiopia by different ways and weaken it. And so and that could create a lot of problems for us. So when you look at the election of the United States, you have to be very educated. The Eritreans, Ethiopians, and everybody from the Horn of Africa have to be very educated about what's going on, look at their interests, and that is peace and stability. And they have to try to find a way, so this is actually the Horn of Africa TV. So collectively, when you think about it, the Horn of Africa needs to really be mindful about what kind of a president they want to see. And if we are, very smart, we can work with any administration, but they have to work within our interests. And the Horn of Africa as a whole, all the countries are willing to work with the United States, that they're interested. They wanted to help, just the United States and establishing itself, economically, politically, and in different ways, without really giving up on their interests. And so the partnership is going to be very important. And the people in in the international community, the Horn of African diaspora everywhere, especially the ones in the United States, they have the power. If they come collectively, whoever is coming to office, if their voices are one, and they can have an impact of what's happening in the United States. And in other words, we're not going to be able to be pushed around if we are, a cohesive voting voice. But that's not the case, because they have so many different, ethnic groups that want different things. And so they need to be very strong. They need to be smart and understand what's going on. So I think that is, the U.S. is going to pursue its interests. Things have gone different. It's completely different than what it was in 2016 when Obama was president. Things have changed quite a bit. The new agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates kind of gives you a hint where things are. The GERD, the Ethiopia, the Renaissance Dam, it's a game changer in so many different ways. And that gives you a different dynamic to it, the peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia. But I don't know that the Democrats are going to be able to come and be able to do the kind of things that they want, but they could still be distracted, because Susan Rice is the most, I guess, dangerous individual. And it is very problematic, because the policies that she pursued were very, very counter a lot of good things in Africa, especially Eritrea.
Yeah, I think we should not leave our fate on the hands of American policymakers. I think we should raise an awareness, as you have said on your book. For majority of Americans, Eritrea means nothing. Most do not know anything about Eritrea. They do not even know it exists. The reality, however, is that the history of Eritrea from 1941 to 2018 is the history of the United States of America. It's part of American history that America should know and understand. So I think in this, we have to work on our publicity of our cause of Eritrean struggle, and what's going on, behind closed doors, and by people like Susan Rice, taking things personally out of context, and running with it. So in this regard, what's the role of Eritrean Americans to break the barrier and reach out to the American people and share these historical facts?
Well, we are in a very, very unique moment. We have a tremendous opportunity, after the war. And one of the things that the Trump administration did was, just understood that the sanction measure was not going to work. So we have an opportunity to establish ourselves in so many different ways. We have to establish inside Eritrea economically. Eritrea is going to have to, Eritrea is so important for the Horn of Africa, for a global economy. Just our strategic importance is, just still very, very prominent. So we need to establish ourselves economically, and we need to reintroduce Eritrea, the Eritrean brand. It's extremely important in the diaspora, the outside community. So in order to do that, we have to educate ourselves. We have to unearth our history. We have to relearn our history. And I think the book attempts to do that. It's to go back and, all the kids outside the country have to learn about their history and to be able to educate it. And also establish ourselves as communities, a Bible community. And, that is going to be very critical. The community, we have to be able to serve ourselves as a community. We have to be able to come up with ways and how to connect with our country. We have to establish our community centers all over the world. We have to utilize all our resources. We have to know, the people that are educated, the people that have, that can contribute in any way to their country. They have to be able to come together. If there are doctors, they have to have some kind of a doctors' institutions that is going to be focused on the country, on Eritrea. And they also, the business people have to do the same. Just educators. Everybody has to come together as part of one community, under one community umbrella, and that's very critical throughout the world. And there are some communities of the world that do that. I think without even though they're kind of unique, to look at what happens to the Jewish communities across the globe. And I think that's an example that you can take. They have community centers everywhere. They work under the Jewish Federation, even though they have different community organizations. They all work towards one big goal, which is connecting to their background. And that is the kind of example that Eritreans could take, to really take the approach, a community approach to the highest of levels, to establish themselves economically, and, gather in ways that are going to be able to have an impact in the long term in the U.S. Governance infrastructures. In other words, establish lobby groups, become the lobbyist yourself, and just have a presence in the U.S. governance infrastructures, whether it's in the Congress, Senate, and the State Department, everywhere, in the White House, and do that as people, as collectively as people. I think that's going to be critical, and we have to have leaders of the Eritrean community really rally the people back. We have suffered a great deal over the last 20 years. A lot of people came out, and they came out, they asked political asylum based on, making statements against the government of Eritrea, but they need to corral themselves. They need to come back together for their own interests. They have to know it is in their best interest to come together, work as one. If they really love Eritrea, to come together as a community and address, any interest that they have as one. And, it's a challenge, but we need to have leaders that are going to be able to really speak to the people and, work with the government of Eritrea and do it at the highest of levels, and also establish relationship with the other members of the communities for the Horn of Africa. The last 20 years, we worked with different groups, especially Ethiopians, to do those kinds of things. During the Obama administration, the first election, we kind of came collectively. We hoped that Obama was going to be good, and based on his rhetoric, but it ended up to be. But there were Somalis that worked with us, and just a lot of different groups that came together, and we need to reestablish that at the highest of levels, work with all the different Horn of Africa communities across the United States and in the world, and forge partnership with them, just create kind of like what you're doing now, a medium to be able to talk about our interests and how we can further our interests collectively. And peace is our interest, the number one interest. Peace is extremely important, and development is important, education is important, health is important. When you think about Somalia, Somalia for over 35, 40 years has been under an incredible amount of war. And generations of Somalis were really, they didn't have access to education, healthcare, proper healthcare. It was just under constant wars. And so we need to reestablish, the Horn of Africa in a way that is going to be prominent. We have to play the kind of role that, Dubai, the Emirates, those kind of countries play in the world, become economic hubs, a place where, we become economic engines of the world. And we have the possibility to do that. We have the location to do that. We have the resources to do that. There are so many opportunities, and we need to be able to understand what that power means, and to kind of be the salespeople of the region, representatives of the people of the Horn of Africa. And that's the kind of thing that we can aspire to do.
This is very interesting topic, Amanuel. I'm enjoying it, and I'm sure our viewers will enjoy it. Finally, let me just quote from the book. My hope is therefore to encourage and let Eritreans know that it is incumbent upon them to tell their story and correct the false narratives that have been written about Eritrea for a long time. I also want to encourage my fellow Eritreans who are very experienced and well-versed historians to tell their stories. Eritreans are exceptionally good at telling each other and their children stories about their experience, but sadly, there are not many writers. That is a serious problem. That's what you have said. What is your advice to the Eritreans in general and to the new generation in this regard, please, Amanuel?
Well, the history of Eritrea is not told by Eritreans. For example, well, one of the British administration rulers of the 1940s, one of the governors, wrote a book about Eritrea, and a little bit, about Eritrea. You can go to Encyclopedia Britannica, you can go to Harvard, you can go to Cambridge, and look at all the publications about Eritrea. They all put narratives that were written in the 40s to 50s from their perspective. None of it is written by us. It's written by foreigners, and they were propagating their own agendas. And so the information that the world has about Eritrea is wrong. It's misleading. It's a misrepresentation of the facts. It doesn't really reveal the whole story. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know about, Eritrea, the role of the United States in Eritrea is because it's not written. It's written in a way that suits their interests. The Unionists wanted to be a part of Ethiopia, and they presented in a way that they were the dominant force, and that's how Eritrea voted to be a part of Ethiopia. That's how it was portrayed. They don't really show the role of the United States, the intricate part that the United States played in the process. And now because of all the documents are out, all the historical facts are out under the Freedom of Information Act, so people can research the real history and find the exchange. And one of the things that I'm going to do is I have created a website called U.S. Eritrea, and a lot of the documents that I unearthed are going to be in that in the website. And so people can start researching the stuff. It becomes something that they can start to do. And we have a lot of young people, very educated young people. We have to give them some platform to be able to write out their history. I went to Asmara, I talked to my elders, people that were alive during the Federation, that were part of the Federation, and their ideas, their views, their stories are very limited. They tell you segments of the story, but they don't tell you the whole story, and even some educated people, they have not really researched the stuff in the way that they should. And so we have snapshots of history, but we don't have the entire picture. And so it is very important for us to be able to correct the narratives in schools, correct the narratives and, and our ideas and our minds and our stories, to be able to have the correct historical facts, at least in place. And that's the only way we can educate the international community. This is what happened. This is the real story. And that's the only way we can tell our story and sell our perspective. And I think we are in a very, very critical place. We are in a good place to do that. We have an opportunity. There is peace. There is an opportunity for development, and we can play a significant role. We have to rush at this point to play a role, because you don't know, like you said earlier, with the election, what comes up, what kind of challenge that we're going to be presented with in the future. So because of that, we have to run, to help Eritrea establish itself, politically, economically, diplomatically, and outside the country, as communities, as the members of the international community. So we really have to establish ourselves in so many different ways. And so it is critical that, we tell our stories, use that to bring us together, use that to help us come together. And I think this is a good start. And I hope that people embrace the ideas, get an idea based on my storyline in the book, based on the historical facts that we put in, use that to do more research. We have so many different history lines that we can address. The Italian history in Eritrea is not touched on. The British administration is not touched on. Ethiopian legacy is not, touched on. We talked about Haile Selassie earlier, and so many different issues that we have not been able to talk. The Eritrean government, especially the APLF, is very good at documenting things, and they have done an incredible job. And I think to provide a context to the world based on this different historical facts. I mean, so many storylines that have to be told, and our educated, our historians, everybody has to engage to write things, to document things, and however we can. And that's going to be very, very critical for the future. And I live in Virginia, very close to Washington, D.C. My friend's kids, Fitzum, he has two daughters, and in the elementary school, and that they went to, there were flags of all the different countries of the world were represented in the Eritrea independent, and they don't see the flag. And so they go to the school and they say, how come Eritrean flag is not there? And this kid really fought, and their parents had to go to the school to make sure that Eritrean flag is represented in their school. And they actually took the flag themselves and presented it to the school. So there's a flag there. So it is very, very important not only
he's going to be one of the future leaders, I'm sure.
it's very important. It's going to be very, very important for our kids, for their soul, for their confidence, for their thinking, to be able to have the accurate representation, to be able to tell their stories, and by their own educated individuals or scholars or writers or what have you. So I think it's very, very critical, and I think we should emphasize that. We should do that not only for us, but just because this is the legacy that the martyrs have left, and this is the beginning of our struggle for independence. And the people that fought for 30 years and paid for with their lives, the only way you can honor them is by sustaining their history, perpetuating their history, making sure that they live, tell the story that they died for. And I think it's very, very important to stress that fact.
Finally, Amanuel, I would like to give you an opportunity to add anything if we have missed something or anything.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think this is really a good conversation to have. There's just a lot of different points of view we can address. We can talk, and we just have to talk about them however they come. And the U.S. history in Eritrea is extremely important. It is the untold story of the world. And it is part of our history. And I hope that people read it and take from it whatever they can and build upon it and develop the story, sell it to their, just when you are abroad, everywhere you go, they ask you, where are you from? You tell them you're from Eritrea. They don't know where Eritrea is. And so now you have a book and say, well, this is the history of the United States. The United States has the history in Eritrea, and it's a prominent history, a history that played a role in the world, a very, very prominent world. What happened in Eritrea, 1942, is the British Empire ended, and the United States took over, became the sole superpower with the Soviet Union, of course. And the colonial era in Africa ended, and the United States started a new colonial legacy in Africa. And the Cold War started, and it started right there. So it was very significant historical events that took place in Eritrea, and the Eritrea played a key role in the Cold War, and the Cold War was fought in Eritrea. So Eritreans have to understand that. They also have to understand that they have to come collectively as a community. It is important, and not only come as a community, but also a community that is directly connected with the country and is willing to contribute economically, politically, diplomatically, in every way they can to establish Eritrea, become one of the most significant players in the world economy, in the world politics, diplomatic initiatives. We are playing a very, very significant role right now. But I think when the people are involved from the outside at that level, and the government is engaged with them in that way, we don't have. And also, there's very important something that I want to say. What happened over the last 20 years? All the enmity that was directed at Eritreans, now it's going to have to dissipate, because the driver of all the negative stuff that happened to Eritreans, or is happening to Eritreans, is driven by a minority in Ethiopia, which is the TPLF, the WWII. And they know us. They have known us because they have lived with us, and they know how we lived, what we ate, what we did, everything. And so they infiltrated our lives in ways that are extremely negative. And so in Sudan, after the war, the Bashir administration was bringing in a lot of the opposition forces, what have you, and they were working from Sudan. And when that happened, when the disappeared from there. They ended up going to Tigray, Ethiopia, and so they started from there. So there's one thing that's very significant, which is in 1991, when Eritrea became independent, all these different oppositions ran away from Eritrea. Nobody was talking anything because Eritrea was in a very, very good position. And but in 1998, after the war, in 2000 after the war, they activated all these different groups. And now we are in a good position. We have really, quarantined Wayane and ways, but we need to make sure that they completely disappear. And I think the government of Eritrea and Ethiopia are working towards that goal. And when they die, a lot of their agenda is going to die abroad. And I think that's very, very critical. So the people of Eritrea need to understand a lot of the noise that's coming right now is based on that. And so we need to make sure that we don't play a part in it. And also we need to, once that settles, to put the Eritrean brand at the highest of levels. We need to talk the good things about Eritrea, what Eritrea was able to achieve. And I think we always have to be positive about what Eritrea is doing and, really counter the negative stuff that they're trying to get out. So it's very important to have established medium like this, to be able to talk to people in their languages. Eritrea is really a force of good, a force of, stability, a force of economic development, a force of a lot of good things for people. And, it's got an incredible history to tell. And I think that's what we need to embrace as people and be able to explain that to the world in so many different ways, social media platforms, and in every way we can to promote the cause of Eritrea. So I think that's what we need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Amanuel Biedemariam from the United States. He is the author of the book called The History of the USA in Eritrea, from Franklin D. Roosevelt to Barack Obama, and how Donald Trump changed the course of history. Congratulations, sir. And we hope in the future to talk to you again. Have a good night. And sorry we raised you very early. It's early time in the United States, we know. Until next time, dear viewers of the Horn of Africa TV, today's program, I hope you enjoyed it. We had an author of this new book, which we can't wait to read. Until next time, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.